Okay, so now we are in chapter 4.5 and we're doing fractions, decimals, and order of operations. Okay, so writing fractions as decimals. So to write a fraction as a decimal, all you need to do is divide the numerator by the denominator. Here are some examples. 3 over 4, or 3/4. To get the decimal, we're going to do 3 divided by 4. The numerator divided by the denominator. So 4 divided by, or 3 divided by 4. Well, 4 does not go into 3, so I'm going to put a 0, but because I have put a 0, there's a decimal. So now 4 into 30, well, 7 times. 7 times 4 is 28. Subtract, you have a 2. You have to keep going, so drop down an invisible 0. So now 4 into 20 is 5. So 3/4 is the same as saying 0.75. Second one, 2/5. As a decimal, we're going to say 2 divided by 5. Again, 5 doesn't go into 2, so let's put our decimal place there and put a 0. And write the decimal above in your quotient. Now 5 into 20 goes in there 4 times. 4 times 5 is 20. Subtract and you get a 0. So this decimal is 0.4. So to write your fractions as decimals, just take your numerator and divide it by your denominator. So here's another example. It says write 3 and 3/16 as a decimal. So 3 and 3/16. Remember the 3, or this 3, is our whole number. This is your whole number. So what you really need to do is write your fraction part as a decimal. So the fraction part is just 3 over 16. To write it as a decimal, you're going to do 3 divide by 16. 16 doesn't go into 3, so we're going to do 16 into 30, and it's 1 time. Make sure you write your decimal above. 1 times 16 is 16. Subtract, and we have 14. Bring down a 0. So now we have 16 into 140. And that's going to go 8 times. So then 8 times 16 is 128. Subtract, and now we have 12. And we're basically just going to keep going until we have no more, or end up with 0 at the very end. So now 16 into, drop down another 20. So 16 into 120 be 7 times. So now 16 times 7 and it's 112. Subtract, and we have 8. Bring down another 0, and we really have 80. So 16 into 80, and it goes in there 5 times. And we end up with 0. So the fraction part as a decimal is 0.1875. But do not forget the whole number. So this final answer is 3.1875. All right, let's go in our books to page 328. And let's look at number 12. And we have 5 over 12, or 5/12, and we need to write each fraction as a decimal. So 5/12. So we're going to take the top number, which is 5, and divide it by the bottom number, which is 12. Well, 12 doesn't go into 5, so we're going to put a decimal and a 0, write the decimal above. 12 goes into 50 4 times. 12 times 4 is 48. Subtract, and we have 2. And then we drop down an invisible 0, so we really have 20. 12 into 20, well, that's only 1 time. And then 1 times 12 is 12. Subtract, we get 8. Bring down another 0, and we have 80. Well, 12 into 80, that is 6 times. 12 times 6 is 72. Subtract, and we're going to get 8 again. If we bring down another 0, we will still have 80. So 12 into 80 is still going to be 6. So let's write that up there for a second. 6. 6 times 12, 72. And we subtract, and you realize we're always going to end up with this 8. So instead of continuing this problem, you're going to write your final answer as 0.416, and then once we get to the 6, it's going to always repeat the 6. It will be 0.416, 6, 6, 6, 6, all the way down forever. What we do now instead is put a bar over the 6. This bar over the 6 means repeat the 6. So your final answer is 0.416 with a bar over the 6. All right, let's look at number 23. And we have 5 and 17/20. And again, we need to write this as a decimal. So the 5 is the whole number part. And then to get the decimal part, we're going to look at the fraction part. So we're going to do 17 divided by 20. 20 doesn't go into 17, so make sure you put the decimal with a 0. Write the decimal above. Now 20 goes into 178 times. Write it above the 0. 8 times 20 is 160. Subtract, and you get 10. Drop down another 0, and now it's 100. 20 goes into 100 5 times. 5 times 20 is 100. Subtract, and we get 0. So this decimal, do not forget the whole number part, is 5.85. Okay, so now we can compare fractions and decimals. To compare fractions and decimals, you need to write the fraction as a decimal, and then you can compare them. So here's an example. It says compare 0.125 and 1/4. Well, the first thing we need to do is write our 1/4 as a decimal. So that means we're going to have 1 divided by 4. And that's the same as saying 0.25. So now we can compare 0.125 and 0.25. Well, they both have the 0. They are equal and they match up. They both have the decimals, match up. And then the 1 and then 2. Who's bigger? The 2 is, therefore, 1/4 is bigger than 0.125. Here's another example. It says compare, and we have 0.87 and 7/8. So start with the 7/8. Let's write it as a decimal. So it's going to be 7 divided by 8. And we get 0.875. So now we have 0.87 being compared to 0.875. Well, the zeros match up, The decimals match up. 8, 8. So far we're equal. 7, 7. Still equal. Now we have a 5 in the thousandth place, but we don't have a digit here, so let's put a 0. So now who's bigger, 0 or 5? The answer would have been 5. So 7/8 is greater than 0.87. Alright, last thing we're going to talk about is order of operations. So let's remind ourselves of our order of operations. Step 1, you perform all operations with parentheses, brackets, or other grouping symbols such as fraction bars, starting with the innermost set. Work your way from inside out. Step 2, evaluate any expressions with exponents. And then step 3, you multiply or divide from left to right. And then step 4, add or subtract, again from left to right. So let's go in our books to page 329. And we're going to start by looking at number 65. And it says 1 plus 0.8 all divided by negative 0.6. So the first thing we're going to do is work on the top of our fraction. So we're going to do 1 plus 0.8. So adding these together, you should get 1.8 divided by negative 0.6. Now we need to divide these. Well, the top number is positive, the bottom number is negative, so we know our answer is going to be negative. So now we're going to take our top divided by the bottom. So 1.8 divided by 0.6. So recall that when we're dividing with decimals, the number on the outside has to be a whole number. So we're going to take this decimal and move it one place to the right, which means we also got to do the same thing inside. So now we have 6 on the outside and 18 on the inside. Well, 6 goes into 18 3 times. 3 times 6 is 18. We can subtract and we get 0. So this final answer is just going to be negative 3. Okay, let's look at number 64. And it says negative 2.5 times 3 minus 4.7. So again, the first thing we're going to do is multiplication. Multiplication comes before subtraction. So we have negative 2.5 times 3. Negative times a positive is going to be negative, so I know there's going to be a negative in my answer. And then we're going to do 2.5 times 3. 5 times 3 is 15. And then carry the 1, so we get 7. Now remember, there's one decimal place in the problem, so there's going to be one decimal place in the answer. So this becomes negative 7.5 minus 4.7. Now recall that we do not subtract, instead we add the opposite. So this is saying negative 7.5 plus negative 4.7. Both of our numbers are negative, so we know our answer is going to be negative. And because they have the same sign, we're just going to add the numbers and keep the sign. So 7.5 plus 4.7 is 12.2, but it's going to be negative 12.2. Okay, so this will conclude our video for 4.5. Please email me if you have any questions.